the violins of autumn, wound my heart with a monotonous languor.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, the show where we speak to those on the front lines of defending democracy around the world. New episodes drop every Friday, and if you enjoy this program, then I do have one favor to ask of you. If you can think of just one other person who you think may enjoy it as well, may find value in it, a friend, colleague, or family member, then share it with them and tell them why you like it. With your help, we can help get these vital stories out to more and more people. Also, don't forget to check out the rest of my work on the Dictators v Democrats YouTube and Substack channels. If you want to support my work, then paid subscribers to Substack and Patreon get access to Why We Fight 1 week early. With all of that said, let's find out why they fight. Welcome to this episode of Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. I am very pleased to be here with somebody who almost requires no introduction if you follow geopolitics in any way, General Ben Hodges. Ben, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, Theo, thank you for the privilege.
We're going to dive a little bit. I'm going to ask you to sort of cast your mind back some way to when you first took your oath to serve the United States and serve the Constitution. What did it mean to you at the time? And did that meaning change as you rose to the higher levels of command?
So, of course, I was commissioned in May of 1980 after graduating from West Point. And I remember all of us there together, my company mates from my class of 1980, and taking the oath. And number one, it really added, it was like, wow, now I'm really in the Army. I'm not just a cadet anymore. Now I'm really an officer in the United States Army. So the solemnity of the oath to the Constitution was an important part of that joining the Army, and the officialness of it also. Now, the whole 4 years I was at West Point, this was drilled into our heads anyway, you know, whether it was a military law class or leadership class or just kind of the environment, everything was about the Constitution. And also your duty to obey lawful orders, but not to obey illegal or unlawful orders. That was the expectation, because, you know, this is late 70s when I'm a cadet. So Vietnam and My Lai massacre, those things are still relatively fresh. And so, you know, that was part of our education as well. So now here on 28 May 1980, I'm taking my oath to support and defend the Constitution. It was a very solemn, impressive moment.
And why take the oath? Why join?
Well, since I was a boy, I always wanted to be in the Army. I mean, I don't come from a military family, although almost all the males in my family did serve somewhere. So there was like an expectation. I grew up in North Florida, and my family was from Florida and Georgia. And it was the normal thing to do, that either you got drafted or you volunteered. Almost all enlisted. I think I had one uncle or yeah, one great uncle that was an officer in World War II, but otherwise, I come from a long line of privates, and my father was a draftee. Um, but it was expected you were going to do something. And so, frankly, it appealed to me. Growing up in the 60s and 70s, I was young enough that I didn't understand exactly what I was watching, but I was old enough to watch the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite every night, and they would give the report from Vietnam. And so you would see soldiers and helicopters and all of that. So I guess it was the combination of seeing it, being able to visualize it, but also the military was held in high esteem there in my youth, and it was never a question of what I wanted to do after I finished high school. I was going to go into the Army, whether as an officer or enlisted. And then my father said, "Well, son," who had been a private, he said, you should try go in as an officer. And if you're going to be an officer, you should apply to West Point." So I applied to West Point, but I also applied for what we call ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps scholarship. Either way, I was determined to get in. And so getting, I couldn't believe I was accepted to West Point. I mean, I was below average in, I think, every category. Um, and, but I got there and it felt, except for my years of struggling in chemistry and physics classes, otherwise it felt totally natural the whole 4 years I was there.
And after, as most watching will know, after West Point, you've had a long and storied career, ending up commanding US Army Europe. And was there a moment in your service that you felt that the struggle for some of the values enshrined in, especially in the US Constitution, but democratic values more generally, was most tangible, or you felt that these values were most at risk?
I can honestly say that I never felt that the prioritization of our oath to the Constitution, I can't think of a time where that was not solid, or that was it was part of who we were. And the idea of fighting in accordance with the law of armed conflict, you know, within the context of the law, that was, of course, that's what we were going to do, because it was the right thing to do. And also because our allies, if they were going to have their soldiers, their young women and men to serve alongside of Americans, most of them would not have done it if they were concerned that we were not going to fight in accordance with law of armed conflict. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that we were perfect or that we didn't have people who violated that or that did not break the law or that there was indiscipline. I don't want to ever convey that. But the norm is that that's exactly what we would do. And I of course I started off President Carter. Jimmy Carter was the president when I was at West Point, and then it was Reagan, and then it was on all the way up through to the time I retired in 2000, January 2018. It was President Trump's first administration. And even then, while I was not a fan of his policies about pulling out of NATO or withdrawing from Europe, I don't remember seeing or sensing or hearing the sort of things that we hear now. So that's a long way of answering your question. I never felt there was a time that our oath to the Constitution would not be the ultimate. And I also knew that in every headquarters or every unit I was in, that was the expectation. And that I felt confident enough that if there was something I was concerned about, I could go to my commander and talk about it with them.
Are you concerned about that now?
Very, very. I think that our senior officers are in a very, very difficult position right now. I mean, first of all, about a dozen of them have been sacked without any, the normal relief for cause or explanation. There's gone. And then you think about how General Milley was treated after his retirement. So these are signals, warnings, basically. And so the senior leadership of the military now, of course, they all took this oath multiple times. We reaffirm the oath over and over and over every time you enlist, every time a soldier or an officer is promoted, or if a soldier re-enlists for another 3 years or 6 years or whatever. We always use that as an opportunity to reaffirm the oath for everybody so that it's in the fiber of who you are. So you can be sure that those hundreds of admirals and generals who were sitting in that room at Quantico and all of the senior non-commissioned officers had taken or administered that oath multiple times in their career. And now they're being told by the Secretary of Defense that, these rules of engagement, that's woke stuff. You don't need that. That's just an impediment. But that's rules of engagement flow from the law of armed conflict, and our responsibility to that flows from the Constitution. So that right there, as I listened to it, I thought, what in the hell? And then, in the United States military, of course, half of the Army is in the National Guard and Reserve, and the National Guard belongs to the state until it's federalized. So state of California, Texas, Ohio, wherever. And so, of course, the National Guard is used by the governors to deal with emergencies, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, but also civil unrest. But they're trained for that. There is a role for them to deal with civil unrest, to back up law enforcement. The regular Army is not. And there's a reason that we have the law that prevents the military being used for law enforcement, because nobody joined the Army to use force against their fellow citizens. That's not what we're about. So now I see this being talked about openly. And then when the president spoke after the Secretary of Defense spoke, and he said we could use American cities for training areas, like I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So yes, I am concerned. These senior officers are put in a position of they have to fulfill their oath. And a very important part of this, of course, there's a difference between an unlawful order and a really bad or stupid order or a bad policy. And you are obligated to carry out to the best of your ability a bad order. If you've done what you could to change it, to fix it, because you got to accomplish the mission and you got to protect your soldiers, but the order still stands and you got to go do it somehow. So our senior officers are in the position of having to navigate through all that. And of course, if the president says, well, these guys in Venezuela, these are narco terrorists. I'm declaring them an enemy. And so then things start getting a little bit blurred. And we do act on the premise that every order you get is lawful until you can determine that it's not. I mean, it has to work that way. So this is where I think where the retirees, especially generals and admirals, and especially the 4-stars, the very top level guys, and the former secretaries of defense, they have got to speak out. They have got to help protect the guys who are in uniform now, because the ones in uniform now are really in a difficult situation.
Is that what it is that's driving your, fairly increased sort of public advocacy? You've been very vocal in your advocacy for NATO's future, for Ukraine's victory, and for human rights. Yeah, especially platforms like Twitter doing, wonderfully doing interviews like we're doing today. Is this because you feel you have to continue this fight for these values?
Just because I retired doesn't mean that my oath to support and defend the Constitution is now lifted or vacated. I don't have to do that anymore. I still feel an obligation I want to do it. America has never been perfect, but for 2.5 centuries, it's been pretty good despite all of our problems. And it was always the Constitution and the checks and balances that are ingrained in or the framework that we have is what always gave people confidence that, yeah, we may be a mess at times, but that framework has survived uh, for so long, and it's worked, and it's given our allies and friends and adversaries, helped understand who and what we are. And I worry that if that goes, then how do you stop the slide? I mean, how do you prevent uh, such damage? It would be hard to redo all that. Of course, I'm a grandfather, so I think about that, and I don't want to be part of a legacy of a generation that blew it.
I want to talk about the sort of wider geopolitical challenges that democracy is facing. I don't know if you've read Applebaum's work in Autocracy Incorporated, where she describes the network of modern autocracies
Yeah.
to working together on an ad hoc basis. From a military security perspective, how does this networked collaboration pose a different and more complex threat to the West than the more clear ideological lines in the Cold War?
Well, first of all, the lines are blurred a little bit, both in terms of how our adversaries are operating. When I was a lieutenant in West Germany in the early 80s, across the inter-German border, those Warsaw Pact, Soviet troops on the other side.
Mhm.
On our side, you had British Army of the Rhine, the German Bundeswehr, us, and the Dutch and the French and Belgians and Canadians. And it was, who was who. And now, this so-called gray zone operations that the Russians are using against us are designed to make it hard to attribute who's doing what. And if political leaders are unwilling or unable to say this is Russia clearly at war with us, if we can't say it that way, then we're not going to act with the urgency needed to take the steps required to prevent it from becoming kinetic somewhere down the road. That's one thing. But also, as Ann talks about, the intermixing of state and non-state and criminal activities, and then when your own side does things that maybe they're not in the strictest sense of the word illegal, but they begin to blur the lines of what's appropriate. You know, I think a lot of people are having a hard time right now with the fact that the president is getting ready to sell F-35s to the Saudis. Now, there could be some genius thing behind it that this will lead to the Saudis recognizing Israel. Israel agrees to a two-state solution, and somehow F-35s unlock, what needs to be done to get everlasting peace in the Middle East. And I'm not trying to be facetious here. I mean, maybe there is that, but it doesn't. None of that has the feel of this. There's where there were always, and there still are, they're just not followed anymore, strict rules about intelligence and handling of classified information, about what you can receive as gifts from foreign countries. I mean, it's super strict. And it was always intended to prevent the appearance of impropriety, that you were getting something in return for something else. And so it feels like that's not as well, there's no other way to say it. It feels like that's been totally blown away. And use, I mean, I know of cases where officers were relieved because they had their driver did something that was of personal in nature to help them, and you're gone. Okay, now you've got a lot of things happening in different places that are much, much more severe than that. And it's like it has become normalized. And that's the danger, is when this kind of activity becomes normalized, and even the media doesn't dig into it, and the Congress for sure has failed in its oversight responsibilities here.
And it seems to me that so much of your concerns at the moment are, especially about the United States, are returning to the Trump White House. And what I'm passing, and the initial wave in 2016, and you can see it across Europe with the rise of AfD, Brexit in the United Kingdom, is the way our democracies are vulnerable to significant influence from the autocracies, in terms of social media, etc. What can we do to help mitigate that here and now?
Yeah, well, three things come to mind immediately. This is such an important question, but these are the three things that came to mind as soon as you asked it. Number one, leaders have to lead by example. I mean, setting the example. Don't allow things to become normalized that are inappropriate, whether it's personal conduct or finances or respect for property and institutions and traditions. Um, and that obviously has to start at the top, but it's all the way, from the president to members of Congress to governors to members of the administration to teachers and coaches, and setting the example of what's acceptable. That doesn't mean we want a bunch of robots or people, everybody's a Benedictine monk, but the setting the example for what's acceptable and appropriate. I think that's one thing that's required. Number two is education. And I know that sounds like a throwaway line, but I went to a small school in a relatively small town in North Florida, but I can still remember my seventh grade teacher telling me, Ben, you have to have more than one source, when you're writing a paper or working on something. I was in the seventh grade, but I still remember Mrs. McKendry telling me that. And this was at a time when there were only 3 TV channels and a couple of newspapers, and you had magazines, and you listened to the radio. That was where you got all your news. And she said, you have to have more than one source. And now, of course, I think there's a tendency, people get their news and information, or they choose not to be informed, or they just, they listen to the place that makes them feel the best. And so education about, how do you educate yourself? How do you inform yourself? How do you engage in the debates about ideas and understanding what the Constitution is all about? I mean, what do checks and balances? What does that actually mean? So education, in my view, is a critical part of that, and of course, that's not just in the schools. That's also at home and in various organizations, clubs, wherever you are. And then the third thing I think is a media that is active, aggressive, uh, meets professional standards, but really does their job. And that doesn't mean I enjoy all media. I absolutely don't. But it's essential to, for people to be looking under rocks and opening closed doors and asking the hard questions and not standing there with a microphone in the face of a politician or an industry executive and letting them just say what they want without being challenged. I mean, I think there's a reason that this is part of, in the Bill of Rights, that, a media to be able to do that is an important part.
Would you describe healthy media as critical national infrastructure?
I guess in a non-physical way, you could say that. I mean, it certainly is a part. That's not a phrasing that I would have come up with, but I think I see what you mean by it. It is a part of helping us understand what's going on. I just watched a movie a couple nights ago about something that happened back in the 50s. The movie is called Good Night and Good Luck, and it's about CBS News taking on Senator McCarthy during the McCarthy era. And Edward R. Murrow was, of course, a legendary journalist, or news journalist from the Second World War. And then he became one of the leading figures inside CBS News. And of course, it's a movie, but nonetheless, they did a good job of bringing together actual video footage of McCarthy grilling some witness, and how the media played a key role there. Or another excellent movie, The Post, about the Washington Post and the Pentagon Papers. Again, a true story that, again, is a movie, but nonetheless, it shows the power of a media that's willing to ask hard questions and push back on pressure that comes from the White House. And of course, I'm not being flip about this because these are businesses. Every media organization is a business, and they have to. If you can't sell enough or whatever, you're going to go out of business. So it was not inconsequential when the leaders of these news organizations were willing to take on the White House or willing to take on a senator that was scaring the hell out of people. That was not inconsequential, but it was essential in both of those cases.
A quick follow-up on that before I ask that we zoom in on one particular country. Do you think that would be possible today?
I think, yes, first of all, absolutely it is possible, but you see what the current administration has done. I mean, they constantly berate journalists as you're fake news, you're a loser. You know what? You're the worst. I mean, for the president, that's what I mean about leading by example, or his spokeswoman, or others to berate members of the press. Now, it's entirely appropriate if the president says, "Hey, Theo, I read your piece. It was terrible. You were so wrong on this, and to tell you what you got wrong." But to do as he did on board his airplane yesterday, he referred to a journalist as piggy. I mean, it's not exactly the behavior of a guy that's president of the United States, and not setting an example. Because if the president takes the oath to support and defend the Constitution also, that means, should include respect for media.
And zooming in on that one country, Ukraine, obviously the front line in this war between democracy and authoritarianism. Why, to the average American, average European, why should we help Ukraine win?
Yeah. Well, that's a very important question, and unfortunately, the Biden administration did a terrible job of explaining it. I don't think they ever really tried to explain it, and certainly the Trump administration has not done that. And I haven't seen it done by too many other leaders in Europe either, because people want to know. I mean, people will be sympathetic to Ukraine because they see civilians being attacked and killed every night. To see the savagery, and now with media and TV and social media and everything that's out there, you can see almost every hour of every day, you can tune in and see combat. So there is a high level of sympathy, but that's not good enough for strategic decision making and policy. So for me, there are 3 or 4 reasons why Ukraine should matter to the United States. Number one, America's economy is tied to Europe's economy. Europe is our biggest trading partner. So in a purely selfish economic standpoint, it's in America's interest that Europe is prosperous. And for Europe to be prosperous, it has to be stable and secure. And so with Russia's attack on Ukraine back in 2014 and then the large-scale invasion in 22, that put millions of Ukrainian refugees on the road into Europe, which put enormous stress on these European countries, on their social systems. The novelty has worn off. Not everybody in Poland and Germany is as keen, or in Romania, to see Ukrainians showing up now as they were 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So it's put enormous stress there. And it has also disrupted energy and food supplies. So you've got a big impact on Europe's economy, which has an impact on America's economy. So this is not some distant border skirmish happening on the other side of Europe. The second reason it should matter to all of us is because Russia has made it very clear that after they're done with Ukraine, and maybe even before they think they're finished, that they could attack a NATO country, such as Latvia or Lithuania. And it's certainly, if Ukraine fails, they will feel emboldened, and they will have absorbed tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops and all their equipment into the Red Army that would be forced to serve. And so the risk of a war with Russia and NATO goes up if Ukraine fails. That has enormous impact for us and for our allies. And then the third reason it should matter is China. The Chinese are watching to see, does the United States, does the West have the will and the capability and the capacity to help Ukraine defeat a weakened Russia? And if we don't, then I don't think the Chinese will be too impressed with anything that we say about Taiwan or the Philippines or South China Sea. They can already tell that the administration seems a little bit flexible on the sovereignty thing. You know, when Secretary Rubio says, well, Ukraine, you're going to give up some territory here, just obviously as part of any negotiation, as a starting point. You know, that tells China that sovereignty as a principle is maybe not that big a deal for this administration. That's bad news for China's neighbors.
And I've been to Ukraine a number of times, and I do have some questions that I've been asked to ask. But Ukraine's theory of victory at the moment, what do you think it should be? Because it seems to me that the sweeping advances from Ukrainian forces we saw in late 22, early 23 may no longer be a possibility.
So you have to think about, so Ukraine is the defender. They're defending their homeland. Russia's the attacker. So how do you stop Russia from wanting to continue their attack? Clearly, it looks to me that Putin does not have a theory of victory other than to hope that all the Western countries supporting the U.S. finally get tired of it, or that President Trump somehow becomes super energized and gets incredible deals to force Ukraine to stop. I mean, it looks to me that Russia cannot and never will be able to defeat Ukraine outright. I mean, after 11 years of combat, especially the last 4, the Black Sea Fleet really not a factor anymore. The Russian Air Force does not dare fly over Ukrainian or through Ukrainian airspace. The Ukrainian Russian army, you know, the losses, you know, somewhere between 900,000 and 1.3 million killed and wounded and captured, wrecked their mobile forces. It's taken them 20 months to get from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk. And even if they do eventually get Pokrovsk, it's not going to have any strategic significance because they can't exploit it. There's nothing, then what? And so I think Putin sees that, but he's got to keep fighting because his survival probably depends on keeping this going, is my view. And so, which means he has to keep justifying it somehow, or at some point the oligarchs are going to say, you're done, because he has ruined their prosperity or much of it. So it's not going to be killing a bunch of Russians that finally causes the Kremlin to say, okay, we're good. It's going to take what is it that keeps Russia able to do this? And I think this is Ukraine's theory of victory. They have stopped the Russians at sea, on the land. Now there will be a big celebration in Moscow when they finally do get the last little destroyed house of Pokrovsk. Okay, but that's not going to matter in the big picture. But you can kind of steel yourself for that. But other than killing innocent Ukrainians and attacking infrastructure, there's nothing else they can do. And so I think Ukraine has realized they've stopped that. And so now they're focusing on the destruction of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. That's their theory of victory. And if they continue to improve at what they're doing, and it feels like each week is like, damn, they got Novorossiysk, holy hell. And of course, all of these places have to be reattacked, but nonetheless, their own defense industry is improving, and their ability to hit targets deep. They're plus with special operators that are operating around the logistical, the railroads and so on.
Yeah.
I think this is how they do it. And eventually they won't be able to sell enough oil and gas to Russia, to China and India to pay for what they're doing. So now that's a little bit simplified, but that's what it looks like to me. And it would be so much more effective if European countries would stop these shadow fleet vessels, especially in the Baltic Sea, and if the United States and other countries would provide more long-range capability. I don't like to use names of specific weapons. I prefer to talk about capabilities. So the ability to hit a target that's 600, 800,000 kilometers away with precision that knocks out oil and gas infrastructure, armaments factories, those are the kind of things. I think this is how Ukraine does it.
And is there any area of, capability area, etc., that you think the Ukrainians should be focusing on and trying to improve?
Well, from a material standpoint, obviously it's this long-range precision strike and air and missile defense. They have come up with incredible innovations to help defeat the majority of the hundreds of drones that come in every night. I mean, you've probably been very, very close, if not under those kinds of attacks yourself. So it's amazing what they have done. But, this starts turning into a math problem at some point. And can they get to the scale of what they need? But also, General Breedlove is the guy that invented the phrase, it's better to kill the archer than to try to intercept all the arrows. And so the more that Ukraine can be enabled to strike, the Shahed drone factories or where these things are stored, for example, or destroying the airfields from which the big things are taken off, that would be part of it. But the third thing that they've got to do is the manpower situation is something that for the long term they've got to address. I think, and I'd be interested in your view on this. The draft age, that's a cultural thing. That's not for me to say as an outsider. That's a cultural thing for them. I don't tell the Germans that they should bring back the draft. That's each nation has to do their own thing. So that's not the solution. The solution is, I believe, number one, the government has a responsibility to earn the trust of families that if their son or daughter or husband or brother or sister or whatever wants to join, that they will not just be sent off until they've been properly trained, properly equipped, and put into a unit that's properly trained and ready to go. That's got to be the contract. I think right now, most families, I had a Ukrainian friend tell me she referred to it as the prison army. That's what Ukrainians remember. The older Ukrainians remember the Soviet army as a prison army. And so I think the government has a responsibility to earn the trust of families and people. There's like 250,000 Ukrainian military-age males here in Germany, at least males. That's a lot. You gotta don't go grab them, encourage them to come back. And then the other thing is, I think women are underutilized. 20% of the U.S. Army is female. And we had to do that because number one, they're better than men on a lot of things that are required, but also there's not enough men. It's a demographic thing. Not enough men that could meet all the basic requirements to be a private in the Army. And so I think Ukraine could do more, take advantage of a female population that would be tigers out there.
I think what concerns me is so much appears to come down to the quality of your kernel. And there is a residual resistance to cultural change that's come from the Soviet Union. And this is something many of my friends are foreign fighters in Ukraine. And I'll be joining them at some point next year to do some reporting there. And a lot of concern I get is, too many guys think they're Zhukov. And there's not, to the best of my knowledge, an equivalent to, say, Operation Interflex, which is training, privates, infantrymen, that would, say, work for a 10, 12-week course at Sandhurst or West Point. To the best of my knowledge, that doesn't exist.
So, okay, this is an excellent point you're making. Napoleon said, "There are no bad regiments, there are only bad colonels." In other words, it is about leadership. And I have heard that some brigades do extremely well. Soldiers will try to get into a particular brigade because that brigade has a reputation for being innovative, adaptive, and successful, as opposed to one being a old Soviet style, just follow orders, move out. So the big army has to capture that somehow and make sure that lessons learned are being shared across unit boundaries, that, hey, this has worked for us. And so that means, and I've always thought that the best units were learning organizations, that there was a culture of how do we get better? How do we learn from each thing? And doing, what we call in the U.S. Army, the AAR, the after action review. That's it. That's part of the culture. I think that's got to become part of Ukrainian Army culture as well. Now, of course, they've had to start from almost zero to build a what we call the institutional army. You have the institutional army and the field army, or the operational force. The institutional army does recruiting, training, provides equipment, fixes things, all of that stuff, in order to produce brigades and battalions that are the operational force. And so getting the institutional army set to have the training and education component that you just described, making that across the Army, that means you got to put good people there too. You got to have instructors that have experience and that know what right looks like.
What do you think Horse Guards or the Pentagon, the key lessons they should be drawing from this war?
Well, number one, the human domain is still so important. I think there will be a tendency to say, "Oh, we just need a shitload of drones, and they're good to go," instead of thinking about. I was reading Jack Watling's report this morning about how, in some cases, the best units had figured out how to use drones as a weapon system to create opportunity and space for maneuver, so that you could bring up a vehicle that had a big gun on it. So, and that means the way he described it, from his observation of a particular brigade, I think, you have to have women and men that are fit, that can do that, and that are committed to doing that, and they can learn how to do that, because nobody comes in a box knowing how to do that. So continued emphasis on education, selection and education for women and men who are going to serve and be leaders is so important. That's got to be job one. Uh, excuse me. The second thing, of course, is this culture of adaptation inside the procurement process. Okay, I'm sure the British Army struggles with this. The U.S. Army, we had a terrible record of it. And of course, now you're comparing apples and oranges here. The Ukrainians are not dealing with an existing bureaucracy and parliamentary or congressional oversight and laws and all these things that are part of the reason that we are so slow and ineffective. And yet that system has still produced a lot of some of the best kit in the world. So what can we take from how the Ukrainians do things and fit in a US or UK context from a legal standpoint, a budgetary standpoint? I think there are things that could be done, a mentality of, okay, don't try to create something and give it to the force that is perfect and it can do everything, because number one, it'll take too long to get there, and then it'll be obsolete by the time it's finally fielded. And you gotta have scale, so you gotta have a lot of it. So actually, a simpler is going to be better in many cases. And interestingly, even though I love to criticize how the Soviets did things, actually, because they knew who they would have operating their equipment, it was much simpler, than what we have. And you could mass produce it and then you didn't have to have the same amount of training for a tank crew or a BMP crew or an AK-47. It was just simpler to deal with. I think that's a part of it. And then finally, the training base. In the U.S. Army, if you want to change anything, you do it at the big training centers, because every unit that goes to the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, or the Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Polk, Louisiana, or the Joint Multinational Readiness Center at Hohenfels, Germany, where you have the professional OP4, the opposing force that lives there and cheats like hell, and they fight over and over and over. So when Blue 4, the rotation unit, goes there, you want to beat the OP4 so bad because you're sick of these guys, And so if there's something that works, that spreads like wildfire. Here's a technique here. You got to do this. And usually it's basic stuff, that you're supposed to do anyway. But if it works at the training center, the whole Army will adapt it. And so investing in that training is got to be essential.
And something interesting I saw, being a layman for military affairs, though, was the amount of innovation that was taking place 10 kilometers from the trench lines with CAD computers, changing radio signals. And the lieutenant colonel I was with told me we've got a 2-week turnaround before something becomes obsolete, and then we have to redesign it and then spread what we have learned as far as we can.
Wow. Well, it's a recognition of that, which is the key. That they know this. And so as you're making something like, okay, I got to get 2 weeks out of this, and somebody else is working on the next thing.
And I just as we begin to close out, I want to move on to values, and I'm going to say 2 words, and I want to know what they mean to you and what images do they conjure in your mind after your better part of a lifetime spent defending them. Freedom and democracy.
So that's an interesting question, because these are words that we toss around and use all the time. We wrap ourselves in the flag. Americans, we love our flag, and but yet some of the most fascist people and activities I've seen are people that are waving the flag around. or they talk about democracy, but actually the policies that they advocate or the things that they do are not in keeping with those values, as I would see it, to include, how you treat people, respect for the law, um, respect for individual rights. So I think we got to be careful about flag waving, assuming that somebody has a flag in their front yard, that therefore they are a total patriot and they really believe in freedom and democracy. Freedom is feeling free to criticize your own government, or feeling free to criticize, something else that you see or whatever. And I think more and more people don't feel that freedom maybe the way, or we took it for granted. Maybe that's the way to say it. Now, of course, with freedom comes responsibility. That's the hard part, is to accept responsibility for what we've been talking about: education, paying your taxes, doing your part as a citizen, to because somebody's not just handing that freedom to you. It's got to be defended and protected. And you have to stand up for it. And we can see it's happening in the UK, it's happening in the US, and it's in Germany and other countries, that there's a constant pressure to push back on those things. And you can't just, all right, good, we're free, we're good from here on out. You have to constantly defend it. And same with democracy. Democracy is not ballet. It is rugby football all day long, every day. And I think our constitutional system was set up in recognition of that you were going to have. They knew you were going to have friction between the executive, and every president from Washington until President Trump has sought more power. I mean, Lincoln was a huge advocate for executive power. So and Roosevelt was. So the founders knew that there would be executive that would want to expand their powers, and that you would have to have a Congress that was not designed as a business. It was designed to be inefficient, but to keep us from driving off the cliff. And then, of course, the courts exist. And so this democracy means it doesn't mean that everything's just going to run smoothly. It means that there's a framework in place that helps protect those freedoms. And now you can be sure that there's not any soldier, when they were on foot or on a helicopter or jumping into a combat zone in Iraq or Afghanistan, that they were thinking about, I'm doing this for the flag, I'm doing this for free. No, they were thinking, I'm in Alpha Company or Second Platoon, and I'm doing it with the guys on my left and right. And you're scared as you can be, but you're confident in your team. That's who you're doing it for. And maybe when you joined, it was for the flag, but when you're fighting and training, it is all about the who's on your left and right. And so this trust cannot be over. The importance of trust cannot be overstated.
Who's on your left and right? You echoed exactly what General Petraeus said to the same question in that. And to the non-soldier, to the civilian, to Joe Public, who's worried about their taxes, but is also worried about their freedoms and their democracy, what's the one thing that they can do, even sat on their sofa?
Well, I mean, participation is not mandatory, but it's you have to participate. It's one thing. I don't have a lot of respect for people that sit on their couch and just complain about how screwed up everything is, while they're enjoying all the freedoms and benefits of living in a very prosperous democratic society. I think the founders, as they thought about what America was going to look like, it was implied or understood that people would accept responsibility for being educated, understanding what they were doing. In fact, that was one of the in the beginnings, everybody couldn't vote. In fact, you had to be a property owner. And I mean, there were things that were put in place because the assumption that only people who were intelligent and educated would be able to act responsibly inside this revolutionary new concept of citizens. And now, obviously, over the years, the Constitution was amended because of recognition that we want men, women, all races, and it can't be just about if you own property or not. So, I mean, we had some contradictions inherent in the beginning, but for people, when I get into a debate with family members or friends about certain things, very often it's because there's a total misunderstanding of what this is about. But there will always be that too.
Yeah. Well, that's the wonderful thing about freedom, which is a muscle in my mind. You've got to use it or lose it.
Very good. Yeah, that's a good metaphor.
And my final question, this is how I always close out. Do you have a message, if you were speaking to them directly, to the dictators and those who would support them in their ideas and system?
Well, yes. Nobody is going to live forever. And so most dictators don't have a retirement plan. So, I mean, they plan to stay there until they die and then hope that their family, they can hand it off to a family member or something like that. But I would say that seldom works out for anybody. Most of the time dictators meet a terrible end, as will their family, if they have, and there are people seeking retribution. But my message is more to the enablers, people who knew better, but looked the other way or somehow thought that, they were worried about their own safety. I live here in Frankfurt, Germany, and I hear this from my German friends and German family members all the time, their education after the war was all about. How did you let this happen? You saw it. And so now most Germans now are super sensitized to this. And they look at the United States and they're saying, man, you guys are headed down the exact same path we were. And so my message is to those people who are enablers to understand that, the current administration is not going to be there forever. And, whatever deal with the devil you think you made now, you're going to have to live with that afterwards.
General Hodges, thank you very much indeed. It's been a really interesting conversation.
I'm grateful for the privilege, Theo.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Why We Fight. Thank you very much for watching, if you made it this far. And always remember that democracy is non-negotiable. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. What struck you most about their story? What surprised you? What did you disagree with? Feel free to let us know in the comments below and we can have a conversation. But if you enjoyed this work, if you made it to the end, then, well, I hope that you did. Please do like, share, and subscribe. With your help, we can grow this channel and we can get these voices out to more and more people. If you want to support my kind of work financially, then paid subscribers to Patreon or Substack get these episodes 1 week early. Again, that's on all podcast networks and on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and always remember, democracy is non-negotiable. Goodbye.